Hello, welcome to Postcolonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and in this brief video I will talk about the plausibility of a term called Neo-Orientalism. Now, the reason I'm recording this brief video is because quite a few people, especially from Pakistan, have asked me about Neo-Orientalism. And the way they posit this term is that the Pakistani authors writing in English, according to them, since they pander in Pakistani stereotypes to a world audience, so they think that the Pakistani authors are being neo-Orientalists because they are proffering Pakistani raw materials in artistic form to a Western audience. And I think that's not necessarily a plausible way of thinking Neo-Orientalism. One, when you mention Neo-Orientalism in this particular context, there is a misreading of the original concept Orientalism by Edward Said. Now, you can watch my videos on Orientalism and on Said, but the most important aspect of Said's theorization and application of Orientalism was that even though he's accounting for individual representations, what he is trying to define in Orientalism is the entire discursive infrastructure within which Orientalism operated. So according to Said, the way Orientalism worked was because of the European power over the colonies, over the Orient. Because of that power, the Europeans could go there to the Orient, study it, record it, write about it, and then they had modes of dissemination through books, through libraries, right? Through government documents. So you couldn't just be an Orientalist simply by being an individual sitting in your drawing room. You had to be connected to the larger discourse that overdetermined already how you viewed the Orient, right? So Orientalism therefore was this large discourse within which people thought of the Orient a certain specific way, which was somewhat overdetermined by the larger discourse of knowledge about the Orient. Now, when we employ the term Neo-Orientalism for, let's say, Pakistani writers writing about Pakistan, Indian writers writing about India, and if we suggest that they are somehow Orientalizing Pakistan or Orientalizing India, it doesn't have the backing of a large discourse. Now, there are certain overdeterminisms in the metropolitan market. I've published about it, which kind of force these authors to write in certain predetermined tropes, right? But that still is a form of Orientalism. Okay, so the best way to address this issue, and it's a really complex issue that cannot really be dealt in a short video because the issue is of representation. In my 2 articles that I published on this topic, I was trying to figure out why is it that the Pakistani readers read the Pakistani writing in English from a certain place of anxiety. What drives that anxiety? Why do they have certain expectations of it? And then I juxtapose it against the author's right to represent, right? Because those representations have a certain value in the metropolitan cultures. They have the power to shape perceptions or accentuate the stereotypes that already exist. And I think because some of these works do that, by representing the worst examples of Indian or Pakistani cultures to metropolitan audiences, the native writers or critics consider them neo-Orientalists, right? But a better way of designating these writings would be that these people are maybe exoticizing their native cultures, the raw materials from them, and proffering them to a Western audience. Because to do that, you don't need a larger discourse. So the reason Neo-Orientalism doesn't make sense and comes across as a very thinly theorized concept is because there is no accounting for the larger discourse behind it. And unless it is placed in a larger discursive situation where it becomes an over-determining discourse that forces these authors to write a certain way, individual acts of representation in which Pakistan or India or Bangladesh or Kenya is represented a certain specific way can't really be termed Neo-Orientalist. Now let me go to another example. So let's pick up Ngugi Thiong'o's Devil on the Cross. I have a lecture on it which you can watch. But in the very beginning of the novel, Ngugi says, all right, some people are going to say that I am metaphorically washing my national linen in public, because he says I am going to critique the nation. And then he offers a counter-argument through the voice of the narrator. He's like, what would you have me do? To hide the holes in my own front yard with leaves so that my children someday fall into them, or to lay everything bare, right? So that is Ngugi basically saying, I will write about Kenya. I will be critical of my national elite, right? But don't take me as someone who is profiting over the misfortunes of my own people. So what comes across in The Devil in the Cross is that there is a commitment to the people. There is a commitment to the nation. And there is a commitment to the imagining of the nation that was seen in the freedom struggle and unfulfillment of that promise. But the corruption also is not just necessarily represented in national terms. It is connected to the links and the powers in the West, right? So it's a very sophisticated critique. Now, if someone just read the novel thinly and said, wow, this says this about Kenya, and called it Neo-Orientalist, that would be kind of absurd. Similarly, I think we can criticize these authors, especially maybe, let's say, Pakistani authors writing in English, for solely focusing on the negative aspects of whatever they have in their own culture and then perpetuating it. And we could even maybe blame them for exoticizing some of the content, or maybe mobilizing it for their own personal gain, but it still doesn't constitute a discourse called Neo-Orientalism. Now, do keep in mind that there are always Orientalist tropes. So what we can say is that these people are reusing previously established Orientalist tropes, but that still is a question of misrepresentation or question of a different kind of representation. It still doesn't form a discourse called Neo-Orientalism. So to sum up, for anything to be Neo-Orientalist, it has to fall within a larger discourse of Neo-Orientalism. It has to have institutions that empower it. It has to have people who espouse it and teach it, right? And it has to have institutions of prestige. All of that is not available to these authors. All they are doing, maybe imperceptibly, is trying to understand what would appeal to American publishers or British publishers or agents, and then write a novel accordingly. Now that is response to the market demands. Maybe there is a certain degree of over-determinism there, but I don't think so. It qualifies as a Neo-Orientalist discourse. So that's all I have on this topic. Please feel free to comment on this. Let me know what you think. And let me know if you have encountered someone who has used this term in a scholarly work or in a classroom, and how have they explained it. Maybe they did a better job. I'll be happy to learn from you. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Until then, peace and love.